Hey guys, Michael Pizzullo here, psychotherapist in West Hollywood. So I want to share a perspective on this sex positivity movement that's in our culture and particularly in the mental health community because I actually think there's a lot of issues with it, and I really would consider myself someone who doesn't align with a lot of the views behind it. So just generally speaking, there's no really, arbiter or school of thought or, studied philosophy behind this quote unquote sex positive movement. But what I have gathered just anecdotally from people I've spoken to and things I've read is there seems to be this blanket approach to anything sexual where we just deem it positive or affirm it. And I think that that's not the healthiest approach to take. With that being said, and just to give some context, I do think that sex is a part of life. It's a very healthy part of life. It's something that human beings navigate. It's very complex, as we all know, and it always has been and probably always will be. And I think that obviously there are certain cultures who have had very rigid ideologies around it and have forced people to only express sex in very specific ways that were very limiting and obviously shaming for people who were gay or in the LGBT community. So, sexual freedom and liberation is obviously very important. And I don't want anyone to think that I'm at all suggesting that we should take a overly conservative, restrictive approach to sexuality. But with that being said, sex can also be, problematic, dangerous. A lot can come up. It's not, without any kind of consequence or threat to us. And most importantly, we express a lot through sex. Our psychology is very complex. Things get crossed. There's a lot of nuance and abstract, ness to unpack there. But I think it's important when we do work on ourselves to really think about what I'm expressing and why. And we know, for example, that people who have been through trauma often are drawn to, for example, riskier sexual scenarios, even sometimes more, physically violent or pushing the line between pleasure and pain and that sort of a thing, which can be perfectly fine. And you can negotiate consent and boundaries and all those sorts of things. But I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we said that there aren't sexual practices that can be unhealthy for people. And I think I believe, and I think a lot of people would agree with me, that there are often things that can be arousing and turn us on that actually do come from a place of trauma rather than from a place of, health, if you want to call it that we do express a lot of traumatized parts of ourselves, come out in a myriad of different ways. Sometimes that can be sexually. And so you do want to consider that while I may enjoy certain activities and they may be extremely thrilling and compelling, and in fact, if there is such an intensity to something they're doing, that may be a sign that there is some sort of trauma being reenacted behind it actually. But to really consider, is there any part of me that's being traumatized in this process? I would really also especially caution this for folks who have been through, unfortunately, like sexual abuse or physical trauma, to really think about making sure that they're engaging in practices as an adult that are boundaried and healthy. And again, those are very subjective things, which is why I think therapy is useful. But the point of therapy, in my mind, should always be to evoke curiosity towards ourselves rather than just a blanket affirmation and to say that everything you're doing is great, go for it, I'm cheering you on. And again, it's not about judging or shaming at all, because that's very, counterintuitive to the therapeutic process. But I do think that curiosity should be about neutrality, suspending judgment, having wonder, that sort of a thing, rather than just saying, do whatever, do anything, and I'm gonna cheer you on. And I think sometimes mental health practitioners feel like we're kind of backed into a corner where if we don't want to affirm something, we don't know how to say it, and then that gets complicated, especially if you present yourself as being, a very sex positive kind of a person and wanting to be liberated, that you don't want to backtrack and say, oh, I am sex positive, but actually not with this one particular thing. So I think it gets a little tricky and imbalanced and unbalanced. And I think, sex is a very loaded topic for everyone. So it's going to be touchy to discuss it even in a therapeutic setting. But I think it's important to set the frame that not everything has to have just a blanket positivity to it, that it's okay if we stumble sometimes and engage in something that maybe isn't healthy for us. That doesn't mean that we're a dysfunctional person or we're a bad person or that our sex life is, toxic. It just means that you're human, and sometimes we all, get a little tripped up on things. So I think it's important to point this out because I do feel like we've gone into this world of wanting to be so careful to not offend people or be critical in any kind of way that we're going into this place of affirming things without questioning them, which I don't think is helpful and really doesn't help people grow and evolve and expand themselves as people. I know when I work on myself, I want to be challenged, I want to think things through, and I want to get other perspectives. I don't want to just get a thumbs up and being told, keep doing what you're doing, because there's no growth there. So anyway, I'm curious what you all think. I think particularly for gay men, any kind of criticism around our sexual practice and sexuality can be triggering because it can evoke, old experiences of homophobia and so on and so forth. But I do think it's important that we're receptive to feedback, particularly when it comes from someone that we trust and who is, empathetic and really knows our story and can understand that sexuality is a part of us. It's not who we are. It's just part of our human experience. And they're willing to look at it with us with curiosity, but also honesty. So I think I made the point, but let me know what you all think in the comments. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. And I just hope that we can continue to talk about sexuality, and again, in ways that are non-judgmental, open-minded, but also nuanced and willing to question and consider, what we're doing rather than just giving each other pure affirmation with no debate. So I'll leave it at that. Let me know what you think in the comments.